What is going on, everybody? I am back with a brand new video, and I have what I believe could be a very interesting video concept. Let's get into it. Today we are going to be comparing discs based off their turn. Basically, we're trying to see how that turn can affect a disc. I have four mid-ranges, an MD3 which is 5501, the Hex 55-11, and then we just kind of go down the road. The Mana -21 and the Meteor -31. So that turn changes, everything else basically stays the same, and we're going to see what kind of flights we can get out of these. Honestly, I don't know really what the comparison is going to be. Maybe there won't be much, but we're gonna find out. We're gonna start off with the MD3 here, 5501. When I hear those flight numbers, I'm thinking a pretty straight disc with maybe a little bit of a finish, especially if you put it on a little bit of Hyzer. So there's a slight finish that I kind of talk about. Maybe came out on a baby Hyzer, but not much. Now we're just gonna go down the line. So now we have 55-11. Maybe a baby turn in there actually, but you do get that one finish. Granted, I did pull it ever so slightly, but about in the middle of the flight, I see a baby turn. Just very subtle, not a lot. Now we have the Mana 55-21, expecting maybe a little bit more turn. Oh yeah, wow. Maybe more unstable than I even thought. No sign of fight back in that disc, and that's only a -21. The Meteor -31. Well, isn't that interesting? May have been the straightest one of them all. That's interesting. Biggest surprise there was the -31 versus the -21. It seemed like the Mana was the -31. That thing just took off. But I am an amateur. I make mistakes with my angles. One thing I will say is I know I threw them basically the same power because all of them landed in the same vicinity. The Hex and the Meteor went the furthest. Because I know I'm an amateur and I know I make mistakes, I'm gonna give them all another rip on that flat angle the best I can, but this time I'm gonna show you the ground view from this camera. That was pretty good. MD3 really kind of doing what I would expect. No turn there, just a nice little fade. So that time, it didn't come out the flattest, but from what I could see, the turn came in there to get it all the way up to flat at the peak of its flight. So it did kind of Hyzer flip on me, which is where that -1 comes in. Now we got this Mana that just completely took off last time, and I'm curious to see if that was a fluke or if this disc really flies like that, because if it does, I would say this has to be more of a -3 than the Meteor, but we'll see what kind of flights we get this time. It just kind of goes. It's kind of hard to tell if you want to call that a -2 or a -3. It all depends on how you would interpret flight numbers, I guess. But from the -1 to -2, you can, I mean, you're seeing a true difference. I would say from the 0-1 to -1-1, you don't see a huge difference. There's something there, but it's not anything major. And lastly, the Meteor. It seems like the Mana was pretty true both times we threw it. It just kind of rode right. The Meteor last time was shockingly straight though. Okay, a little bit more movement this time, but why is that so straight? Watching that back, I could tell I did not get them the flattest that I wanted to, but I did see some subtle differences within each disc. The MD3 and the Hex actually landed right next to each other when it comes to distance. The MD3 doesn't want to flip up at all. I think both times I threw it on a slight Hyzer, and it kind of just rode that Hyzer. The Hex, on the other hand, when I threw it on a little bit of Hyzer, it flipped up to flat. When I threw it flatter on the first shot, I could see a little subtle turn. Where it gets interesting is the Mana and the Meteor. The Meteor should be a little bit more flippy than a Mana, but it's just not the case today. already tell, the Meteor kind of goes far. I got an extra 20 feet of distance last time. This thing definitely flipped up a little bit on that second shot, and it even turned a little bit, but it had a nice little fade at the end as well. So very shocking coming from the Meteor. I do want to throw them a couple more times, one of which being a full Hyzer flip shot. This is really where we should be able to see that turn affect the disc and how much it wants to flip up to flat. So we'll try to throw some baby Hyzers and get these things flipping. I might have flipped up a little actually, and it fades pretty good. And there's the flip. It's flat, 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 and now it's fading. That's perfect. And you can see about the same Hyzer I put on that. It wants to flip to flat and then turn over. I mean, that just flips up to flat and turns maybe slightly and lands directly in front of me. That may be the straightest mid-range I've thrown. I think we are getting somewhat of a clear representation of how turn can affect a disc and what it does, but also you're seeing that sometimes flight numbers can lie a little bit, considering the -2 is flying like a -3. Another thing that's going to affect how the discs are flying is simply the plastic. So I'm using what I personally own, so it's the best that I personally can do. All right, so I put the drone up one more time. This time I just want to throw a few Annie shots, or maybe just one Annie shot. I think we did a pretty good job with the Hyzer flips to really show you the difference between them. I'm not trying to throw huge Annie shots here. I just want to put them on some subtle Annie just to kind of show you how each of them are flying. I think if I put these on too much, we're going to see the same thing over and over. So just slight Annies. I think that's where the MD3 could be really handy, because it's like nice subtle Annie, keeps it very straight with that fade. The hex is definitely holding over for a little bit longer. I'm gonna try to throw the Mana with a little bit more height. We already know how understable it is. I mean, yeah. I probably wouldn't be throwing Anhyzers with that disc. I would rather throw something a little bit more stable on Annie and force myself to keep it over. Then we got the Meteor, which I think could do really well because it seems like it has a ton of glide, and I think it'll just hover and drift right. Yeah, that's a beautiful flight. It's just stable enough to kind of hold the drift, which I really like. Maybe I should throw that Meteor more often. Now you can kind of tell the MD3 and the Hex, they hold Annie for a little bit. They kind of just fade out. Now that's not to say that you couldn't keep them holding over on Anhyzer. I think you could, you know, give it a little bit more power, a little bit more angle, and you could make those discs work very well for that turnover shot. The Mana, I probably gave a little bit too much Annie. Personally, I don't think I would be throwing this disc on Annie. If anything, if I wanted a turnover shot with the Mana, I would just throw it on some Hyzer relatively high and let the disc turn over and flip by itself. The Meteor, like I kind of mentioned right before I threw it, it holds Annie very, very well. It has just enough stability to kind of slide and drift right and still land flat. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think it was a pretty fun video. I know I didn't throw each shot perfect. I know I'm not the most perfect person to be showing you guys because my angles are going to be a little all over the place, and you saw that, but I think we did a good enough job where you get the idea, you see the difference once we amp up that turn. Let me know down in the comments if I should continue doing videos like this, because we could see how it affects fairway drivers, putters, that sort of thing, and it could equally be a fun video. Anyway, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on the next one.